Hello, everyone, and good morning to our friends out west and in the Midwest, and good afternoon to all of you who are in the East with me and with us here at the League, and good afternoon, good evening to our friends across the Atlantic. My name is Bill Nesper, and I am the Executive Director of the League of American Bicyclists, and it's my pleasure on behalf of the League Board of Directors and staff to welcome you to this kickoff event of the 2021 National Bike Summit, streaming to you live from the United States today and also in Delft in the Netherlands. First, a huge thank you to all of you for joining us today and throughout the event, for being here. We know that we're going to have a really great summit for you. This is the largest national bike summit ever, with over 1,000 participants, because we've had an incredible lineup of speakers, of course, and the sponsors who have really stepped up to make this the most accessible event possible. A big thanks to our platinum sponsors, Lyft and Uber, and also our gold sponsors, the Federal Highway Administration, Lime, and People for Bikes, for their generous support of the summit this year. Also, a very special thank you to the Embassy of the Netherlands here in DC for supporting this virtual tour and discussion, along with the Dutch Cycling Embassy and Mobycon. Just a little bit of housekeeping. All of these sessions, including this one, are in Zoom. We recommend that you watch it in Zoom. These sessions will be available on demand after the summit. Closed captioning is available in all the sessions, and so we're happy to have Stephen here signing with us during the plenaries. We recommend that you use Zoom to view them, and use the Q&A function inside of Zoom during the session to ask your questions, and we'll have time at the end after the tour to get to those. I encourage you to keep the discussions going on all these topics that you're going to see for this week in the community section of the Summit Whova platform. So there's some real upsides to having an online event. One of them is being able, as we are today, to be able to join Melissa and Chris Bruntlett and go on a ride together with them. If you're like me, you've heard a lot about the Netherlands. You've read about their incredible successes in making biking an easy option for all, and have dreamed about going on one of those study tours. We've seen the pictures. We've seen the videos. There's so much to learn from the Netherlands about serving all through better biking. But we also have to figure out, as advocates, how to move beyond the eye roll moment that might happen when you bring up the Netherlands in our advocacy work. So there are two opportunities at the summit to do this. Actually, the first is today. So we'll be getting the perspectives of two North Americans living in the Netherlands, and then we'll inspire and help dispel the myth that the Netherlands has always been this way, with the premiere of the Dutch film Together We Cycle on Wednesday evening. We're excited to be able to offer these and hope to encourage you to look deeper at what is being done here and by leaders in other places like Colombia, Mexico, Uganda, who are adapting transportation networks to their local needs and to make sure biking is safer and easier for everyone. So for this virtual ride, we're thrilled to have Melissa and Chris taking us on a tour through Delft. And then doing the live Q&A at the end. Melissa and Chris are both, they're Canadian authors and urban mobility advocates who strive to communicate the benefits of sustainable transportation and inspire happier, healthier, more human scale cities. Their first book, Building the Cycling City, The Dutch Blueprint for Urban Vitality, explored the urban and transportation planning decisions that established the Netherlands as a bicycling paradise, and how North American communities are translating these ideas to build in their own cycling cities. We're looking forward to their forthcoming book too, that's coming out in June, Curbing Traffic, the Human Case for Fewer Cars in Our Lives. In 2019, Chris and Melissa and their two children relocated from Vancouver, British Columbia to Delft. Melissa, who is now at Mobycon, which is a bicontinental mobility consultancy, and Chris is the communications manager for the Dutch Cycling Embassy. So I'm sure you're as excited as me to join them now and start this ride. So over to you, Melissa and Chris.
Hello everyone, good afternoon and greetings from Delft here in the Netherlands. We are really excited to be here today with you to kick off the National Bike Summit. We'd like to thank the League of American Bicyclists for this opportunity, and for the Netherlands Embassy in Washington, D.C. for inviting us and supporting us with this presentation. My name is Chris Bruntlett, and I am the Marketing and Communication Manager at the Dutch Cycling Embassy.
And my name is Melissa Bruntlett, and I'm the International Communications Specialist for Mobycon here in our Delft office. And as Chris said, we're both really excited to be here today to be able to share what has become our new hometown. Just about 2 years ago, we moved here from the west coast of Canada, the bustling, vibrant capital of Vancouver, to this very small, in context, little town in the Netherlands, smack in the Randstad, but still nice and quaint and cozy. And yeah, really excited to share what the experience has been so far. But when people think of Delft, if you're familiar with the city, you're probably familiar with the Delft-Blauw pottery that the city is famous for. You think of the historical tourist sites like the new and the old church, but like massive canals everywhere, lots of old houses in that really picturesque Netherlands. But unfortunately, that's not what you're going to get to experience today. You'll experience something, I think, even more insightful.
Yeah, a lot of people have asked us why we would want to present Delft as a place that the United States can learn from. And I think there's a lot of parts of Delft that were built after the Second World War with really wide streets, tall buildings that do feel very North American, at least in their bones. So we're going to ride a lot of those streets today on our bicycles and show you what's possible when you start allocating prioritization and space for cycling. Just to let everyone know some basic facts about Delft. Yes, it's about 100,000 people nestled in between Rotterdam and The Hague. The bicycle mode share is a whopping 50%, so half of all trips in the city are made on a bike. The walking mode share is about 30%. Public transport's about 2%, and the car is the remaining 18%. So it's a city that has sustainable transportation in its bones. The car plays a very minor role now, but it obviously wasn't always that way, as we emphasize elsewhere in the Netherlands. And it's part of this larger Randstad area, and I think this is definitely a point that we want to emphasize is Delft isn't just one isolated city of 100,000 people. It's part of this greater metropolitan area that includes Amsterdam, Rotterdam, The Hague, the Port of Rotterdam, which is the largest in Europe, Schiphol Airport, which is the second or third largest airport in Europe, and about 8 million inhabitants that are all connected by trains, motorways, bicycles, and the like. So this is completely comparable to a New York City, to a greater Los Angeles, to London, to many other metropolitan areas. And that's probably the best point of comparison for what's possible in the Randstad region, where about a third of all trips are made by walking and cycling, a third are made by private car, and a third are made by public transportation. So it's not one single mode of transport that dominates, but more of a balance between those three separate modes. But that's perhaps enough of that. Let's get started and let's get rolling on our bikes.
Yeah, so the tour that we're going to take today will actually start very near to that historic center that we're not cycling through at Delft's main train station. And then we're going to head into a more diverse neighborhood, one of those neighborhoods that was very much built with the car in mind at first and has transformed over time. And we're also going to take you into one of the local suburbs nearby, well, basically right next door to Delft and Den Hoorn, to show you how even at a neighborhood level, when we're thinking about North American suburbs, a lot of these ideas have been put into practice and could be translated to North American streets. And show off some of that fabulous infrastructure that you're probably really eager to see. But one thing I do want to note, if you look on the map that we have, you'll see that we're going to actually pass, what's really important is we're passing not only shopping districts, but also plenty of schools. So some of these routes are the routes that our own children take to get to school. We'll also pass by the local hospital, so showing how all these routes are connected, which will tie into the presentation a little bit further when we're riding along. So let's get started. All right, so we're going to get started on the tour, and I'm going to let Chris describe what we're seeing.
All right, so we are arriving as if we were a train passenger at Delft Station, walking through the turnstiles straight into the bike parking facility that is underground beneath the station. This opened in 2018 as part of a really massive €1 million redevelopment that saw them bury the train tracks and double them to 4 from 2 throughout the center of Delft. And as part of that, 5,000 parking spaces were created. Very quickly learned that, however, those bike parking spaces weren't enough. And the city has subsequently built another 5,000, so there's currently 10,000 bicycle parking spaces underneath just the one central train station, which is quite amazing. But well, I think we need to put that in context and explain why the demand for bike parking at the train stations is the way it is.
Yeah, well, I mean, basically everywhere in the city is connected to these train stations, not just in Delft, but cities around the country, by ample cycle tracks. And so that's how people basically get from home to the train station. And then because of the sheer number of people that cycle here, which most of you are probably familiar with, allowing all those bikes on the train is just not realistic. And so that's why these massive bike parking facilities are built, to facilitate that bike train combination, and then augmented with OV-fiets at the other side.
So an amazing 50% of all train passengers in the Netherlands arrive by bicycle. And it just speaks to the way that they've created the infrastructure that feeds into the rail network, these really fast, frequent trains that run from Delft to Rotterdam and The Hague and Amsterdam at 5-minute intervals. Creates this really amazing synergy between the public transportation system and the bicycle system, and we use it almost every day, and it's really a joy and a pleasure, and replaces our need for a family car.
Yeah, I want to point out we're just passing one of the first schools that's on the route, and we just passed one of the first major intersections of the tour, which is actually quite massive and has a lot of facilitation for not just bikes through a protected intersection, but also cars, trams, buses, and of course pedestrians. So it's a really big space that makes it safe and comfortable for everyone using it, and is part of that redevelopment process that Chris mentioned earlier. And so now we're heading west in Delft, and we're actually passing one of the fire stations as well, which is quite innocuous. You don't really notice it there. But that brandweer is where our fire trucks stay when they're not busy helping people out. And now we're at yet another protected intersection. Again, one of those spaces where you see ample space for cars. It's quite a broad intersection, waiting area in the center with tram space as well. And yeah, really integral in terms of that safe route to, well, for our kids, it's the safe route to school.
Because I think we've seen as former North American bike advocates, that a lot of cycling infrastructure in North American cities gives up at the intersection, and it's something they do really well in the Netherlands, is providing physical protection at the corners with these rounded bulb outs, and then a mid-block refuge, a pedestrian or a cyclist island, if you will, so that you're never actually crossing more than 1 or 2 lanes of traffic, and never exposed to that danger for a very long period of time. And because the vast majority of collisions occur at intersections, it really reduces the conflict, reduces the danger, slows down the cars, forces them to make eye contact with the cyclists and visually acknowledge the cyclists, and results for a much safer interaction amongst the various modes of transportation.
Yeah, and this isn't the first intersection that we'll experience. And actually, what's funny about this particular tour is Chris and I often joke we cycle around the city and never put our feet down because there's so few stop signs and stoplights. This tour is one of the few where you'll actually experience that a little more in the city of Delft, as you just saw us sitting there waiting at one of those intersections. But what's really special about them, and what you'll notice as we travel through the others, is the way that the cars have to turn. They're perpendicularly facing the cross traffic. So unlike in North America, where you're often looking so far ahead, here you're forced to stop, and then there's a lot of space for forgiveness, which is part of all infrastructure design here in the Netherlands when it comes to accounting for vulnerable road users.
So the street we're traveling on now, which I won't even attempt to pronounce because it's quite a mouthful. Would you like to try?
No, it's okay.
It was the subject of a road diet in 2011. So what was formerly 4 lanes of traffic is now just 1 lane of cars in each direction. A nice wide tram and busway that runs down the center, and then these beautiful bi-directional cycle tracks and plentiful footpaths on both sides of the street. So it's... And
still, I should note, also street parking. You're seeing lots of cars parked on the street, so nothing was sacrificed really when this road diet was put into place.
when we talk about complete streets, I think this street has it all, and we're going to come across now up to the crowning achievement of that complete street, and that's the Delton Plain Roundabout, which replaced the signalized intersection, was part of this road diet, and created, I guess, a more organic flow of traffic. What was formerly two 4-lane approaches is now just single lanes of cars coming into each other, and then the pedestrians and cyclists have full priority in both directions all the way around this roundabout.
Yeah, I think that priority is something that we still haven't lost the joy of as you're approaching and you watch the car stop and you're just like, haha, now you have to stop for me, which is, I think our son loves it the most actually. But it's this really seamless way to move around this space. And one of the things that's really important about this space is that it is also a major shopping point. So you've got a lot of shops in and around this street, but you've also got the Jehovah Shopping Mall where there's grocery, pharmacy, clothing, everything you need, and also another, what we would consider the big box, Albert Heijn XL, where we do a lot of our groceries, is all around here. So from our home, this is the path that we take to get there, and it's very safe and comfortable and allows us to do those day-to-day trips. It's also a very diverse community here, so you've got a lot of migrant women that are traveling around the community, getting kids to school and doing the various care trips. And so these facilities help to really allow them to be able to do so comfortably and quite seamlessly, which, yeah, I think shouldn't be undervalued.
So one last point about that roundabout before we forget is that, I mean, it has so many benefits in terms of creating this signalized intersection, well, transferring from a signalized intersection to a roundabout, not the least of which was it would reduce the wait times for all the drivers. They were no longer waiting 90-second intervals for traffic lights. They were waiting on average just 10 seconds to get through this intersection. So it actually improved the travel times despite reducing the number of lanes. The drivers were getting where they were going faster. This vast sea of asphalt was suddenly planted with natural plants and greenery. So it's less asphalt, it's increased travel times, it's more social trust and contact between road users. In our eyes, it's definitely a win-win-win. And the really cool thing is that the trams and buses go right straight through the middle of the roundabout, and an aerial view makes that abundantly clear that it actually prioritizes the public transportation over all modes there.
Yeah, so now we're traveling through the neighborhood of Poptehof, which is that diverse community I mentioned earlier. And one of the things I think is important to note here is this pathway that we're currently traveling along is also the direct connection to the local university, TU Delft. So not only are there lots of families living in this neighborhood, but there's lots of students and professors and grad students, PhD, and they're all using this direct connection to get to and from the university. So it's this great connector that not only gets them to this neighborhood, but further west, which is where we're going to travel now. So we're currently traveling along Princess Beatrixlaan, which when we look at this from the aerial view is actually a very massive intersection. And I think really might be more recognizable for a lot of people in North America. You've got, I think it's 2 to 3 lanes in each direction traveling. It's almost basically, we would call it a flow road here, almost a motorway in treatment. And so that's why the cycle track is so far removed. But once again, we're coming up to, although it's a signalized intersection, a completely protected intersection with light phasing that makes it safe and comfortable to cross. And one of the cool things, you're going to miss it here, but I think we come up to it again later, is that at this intersection in particular, there's these lovely wait counters. So tell people on bikes how long they're actually going to have to wait, which
it clicks down with a light to let you know exactly how many seconds you have left. And one of the cool things about this particular bike ride, it was taken as all the elementary schools let out. So you'll see lots of kids cycling home, completely unsupervised, from their parents, and this is another thing that we often talk about, the cycling infrastructure enables is children to travel independently without mom or dad having to shuttle them around in the back seat of the car.
Yeah, and it's something that our kids started doing immediately after we moved here. So our son Etienne was nine when we moved here, yes. And our daughter was 12, and each of them, once we took them on the route once, had figured it out on their own and were able to travel comfortably, and now actually go a lot further than just the to and from school route. So yeah, I mean, you can see as we traveled through, that was quite a big intersection. You might have noticed that we've been on quite a number of bidirectional facilities, and part of that is because these roads are so wide and there's amenities on both sides that to not accommodate for people traveling on either side of the street would be really inconvenient, which again is one of those principles when we're talking about design here in the Netherlands, is how do we make it comfortable?
Yeah, we sometimes hear that bidirectional cycle tracks are more dangerous than nothing at all, and we obviously push back against that. If you get the intersections right, if you get the side streets right, if you use color where it's needed, and make drivers aware that they should be looking for there's no reason you can't use bidirectional, and it's obviously context specific, as you see here.
Because now we've gone down to a unidirectional. And you're actually about to have a little bit of fun with Chris on a much smaller scale roundabout that connects two more residential neighborhoods. And we're about to head into the adjacent suburb of Den Hoorn, or a community of Den Hoorn. I don't know if it's necessarily a suburb. But you can see here we've got now a single direction roundabout that takes us all the way around, still prioritization, so quite comfortable, still those massive turning radii, so it's 5-meter turning radii, so the cars are completely perpendicular when they interact with bikes and pedestrians. And that's actually something we haven't mentioned yet, but you'll notice that in all of the intersections we travel through, the pedestrians are always the furthest away from the turning traffic. So first those turning cars interact with the bikes, and then the pedestrians, providing the most vulnerable users that extra added benefit of safety.
So I've taken my extra loop around the roundabout just because I enjoy it so much. And yes, up to this point, we've been riding for almost 15 minutes, and we've been completely segregated from traffic the entire ride. And this is something that will change as we move into the residential neighborhoods. But in general, if a street has a 50-kilometer-an-hour speed limit, that's 30 miles per hour, then by law, the national standards require physical separation between bicycles and cars. And Delft is just an example of dozens, if not hundreds, of Dutch cities that have implemented these standards to create fully segregated cycling infrastructure with very little exception on its major arterial streets.
Mm-hmm. And so now we're traveling into Den Hoorn. This is the Buitenwatersloot, which actually takes you to where we live in Delft, but we are actually directly connected to this pathway that takes you comfortably into the adjacent community. You can see that it is shared with mopeds traveling at slow speeds. It comes up a lot in conversation, but part of that is only because there's ample space and because this is more of a connector route between cities. But obviously the bicycle is what they're designing for first, and here we're in a very much of a shared space environment where cars and bikes and pedestrians are all sharing space.
Shared space, but the car-through traffic is severely limited.
Yes.
So you'll see no cars that are traveling through. Every car on this street lives on the street or is visiting this street, and that's how the mixed traffic works in the Netherlands. And this is when we get this question about whether separation should be required. We say no, but you have to get your traffic calming right, and you have to get your filters, your permeability right. And this is something we've cycled through bollards that prevent the cars from going through, but filter the cyclists and pedestrians and allow them to get through and use the street willingly.
Yeah, and you'll also have noticed that the treatment of the road surface has also changed. We're now into paver stones. And so that will indicate to people driving that they need to slow down. They're going to start to feel more friction, hear more noise as they're traveling, which will inherently cause them to slow down. So my colleague Leonard will often say, you design for the speeds that you want, designed to make the drivers change their behavior, and so that's what's taking place here. And this is an interesting bit of treatment here that's really important too.
So we are on a local access road, which is the second category of urban streets, if you will, in the Netherlands. About 80% of the road network these local residential streets slowed to 30 kilometers, that's 20 miles per hour, not just by a speed limit, by design speed. So the streets are designed for the speed that the authorities want, and that is through the narrowing of streets, the creation of bulb outs and chicanes that force drivers to take an S pattern rather than drive in a straight line, create these speed tables.
Yeah, continuous footpaths, so I think would be what people might think of them as well.
Yeah, yeah.
So that you're basically taking the drivers now have to enter into the pedestrian space to cross the street. And so that, what we passed there was yet another one of the schools. So now you've got kids having this safe way to travel across in a raised, prioritized area just for them.
So I think a lot of people still have this misconception that speeding is an enforcement issue, and I think we would push back against that and say, no, it's an engineering issue. If the drivers are traveling too fast, you haven't designed your streets correctly. And these are just some great examples of engineers designing for the speed that they want, so that the police don't have to go out and hassle drivers for traveling too fast, because as we've said, all the those various elements combine to self-enforce this 30 kilometer per hour speed limit.
Mm-hmm. And so we're just traveling through, this is the main center of Den Hoorn, and you can see there's a few delivery trucks in and around. There's a community center on our right-hand side. We're kind of driving through a parking lot, but it is still part of the transportation network. And also there's a market happening, which is a very common occurrence in most Dutch cities. But it's all treated in a way where everyone can move through rather calmly. Unfortunately, in this case, we had to go through the bike parking to get by. But, you know, it's one of those things where there's this forgiveness built in terms of how you can really use the environment.
The freight truck was still there making its delivery of frozen fish, I think. So, you know, the access for logistics is still certainly there. It's not like the trucks can't make their deliveries. Mm-hmm.
And so now we are currently we're traveling east, or are we traveling south? I can't remember. It doesn't matter.
I was going to say north, but
we get a little turned around. We don't have the mountains to guide us anymore. But this is another one of those direct routes, and we'll come up actually to our daughter's high school in a little bit, where it's connecting the neighborhood of Den Hoorn, the adjacent residential communities, onto these bicycle-only entrances into the space. So that at that intersection, bikes don't have to worry about having to navigate with cars into the space, and then have a continuous safe space to move.
It's a really low-cost, simple way to create elements of your bike network, connect pieces of your bike network just by using bollards and posts, and preventing cars from going through, but allowing the more desirable mode of travel to access the street.
And I mean, these are residential neighborhoods, so obviously people still own cars. I think we often remind people that car ownership in the Netherlands is as high or higher than many other European countries. But the access isn't removed, it's just that through traffic that I think a lot of us battle with in North America is taken out of the equation. And so we've just entered onto a dedicated cycle track with some room for cars to do deliveries. That school on the right-hand side is our daughter's, and this is actually part of her route that she would normally take to school, and we have no worries whatsoever with her traveling along this space.
So the last piece of our tour today is actually a brand new cycle track. I think it opened 6 months ago. We were among the first to ride that sweet red asphalt. This is Renier de Graafweg, which is where Delft General Hospital, you can just see on your right-hand side, is located. And prior to this, it was actually a unidirectional cycle track on this side that we're riding, and then a painted bike lane on the other side. And to us, it just, I mean, we've been amazed at the number of street improvements that have taken place just in the 2 years that we've lived here. Mm-hmm. This idea that the work of a cycling city is never done. The streets can always go better, and a lot of Dutch cities such as Delft are now on their third or fourth generation of street design, all constantly striving for improvement and making it better. And that's a pretty great place to be, I think.
Yeah, and so we're almost near the end of our tour. I mean, this street, one of the things is quite special is it's also direct access for buses too, and so they've actually created bus lanes here as well. So you've got a bus lane, you've still got your car lanes and access to the hospital, obviously, and wide cycle tracks and a bike and pedestrian pathways as well. So yeah, again, that complete street model that makes sure that no matter where you are, you have access. I guess, yeah, the one thing to leave it with, as Chris said, is the city's always changing. So when you can come, we hope to give you a tour and we can show you what else has changed. Probably a little more in the city center. There's definitely some new investments happening there. But yeah, I hope this sort of gives you a glimpse of what is happening here, but what is absolutely transferable within context to a lot of North American streets. So we'll always say you can never just copy paste, but these ideas are a good place to start in terms of creating much more traffic calmed neighborhoods.
Unless you think that Delft was always this way, I mean, one thing we always emphasize is most of the cycling infrastructure has been built in the past 25 years or so. I mean, they only first passed a cycling network plan in 1984 and have been building out since, but this wasn't built, or the city wasn't built with the cycling infrastructure pre-existing, and it didn't happen overnight, but it's certainly
it's a work in progress, and it's definitely getting people where they need to get to.
And it can be taken as a point of inspiration, in terms of how quickly something can be done within a generation, we'll say.
So that was our ride. Hope you enjoyed it. I think there's a few takeaways that we want to make sure to really emphasize at the end of the tour, lest you think it's all wonderful and not applicable.
Yeah, and again, this is something we always talk about, is that cities need to be thinking at the network level. And we happen to live in the first place in the Netherlands that actually started thinking at the network level. 1979, Delft passed this cycle plan that was visionary at the time because it looked at not individual routes, but this coherent network of routes that would get people from anywhere to everywhere within the city. And it was out of this excellent work, this experimental work at the time, that the Crow Manual evolved its 5 principles of network design, where we're constantly talking about is safety, directness, attractiveness, comfort, and cohesion. And these are now principles that we work with cities around the world to try to implement. But from what you saw on the tour, I think is an idea of what that looks like on the ground with the seamless red asphalt, the completely connected routes. There was not one moment there where you or I felt like we were being threatened by motor vehicle traffic, and that is really something to behold.
Mm-hmm. And I think just building on the whole network idea is oftentimes, in North America, we think about separated facilities all the time. But one of the key factors in that is that there's 3 levels of roadways. There's your flow roads, your distributors, and then your neighborhood streets. And so while there are delineated neighborhood bike streets, with that traffic calming that we were pointing out, every street is basically a bike street in your traffic calm neighborhoods. But I think what even builds further from that is this idea of inclusion. So all of those streets that we traveled on, as you pointed out, we both feel comfortable on, our children both feel comfortable on. So when we're talking about all ages, AAA networks, it checks all of those boxes, but it also checks the boxes of maybe less able-bodied people or people that we're not used to seeing. So when we're going through the Poptehof neighborhood, we see women in hijabs, we see people on adaptive cycles, we see people on mobility scooters, all using the safe space because it's been designed in a way that makes it comfortable, and a lot of that comes down to width. And so the minimum, I think, here is 2.5 meters, but even that is small for a lot of Dutch infrastructure, to make sure that they're, like you mentioned, the forgiveness. So even if you've got someone moving very, very slowly on an adaptive cycle, for example, someone that's a little bit faster has the space to move around comfortably. And so that really creates these really inclusive environments. And I think there was one point we were traveling on one of the busier streets where you might have seen, I don't know if you caught it, there was an old woman on a walker, and she's chosen to use a cycle track. And this is something we've heard from a few people we've talked to with disabilities, is that the cycle tracks are often the most comfortable.
It's the smooth asphalt.
And the smooth asphalt, so they're not bumping around. And again, because they're so wide and so removed from fast-moving traffic, it's this really wonderful option for people that I think we overlook a lot in other places, is how they're not, yeah, they're cycle tracks by definition, but they're really mobility tracks for a lot of people.
So that was our very Dutch perspective. I hope that you were inspired. I hope that you learned more. If you want to learn even more, we have, Melissa and I have 2 books that I can recommend. The first, Building the Cycling City, The Dutch Blueprint for Urban Vitality, is available now from Island Press. Our second book is due on the 29th of June and delves into some of these local stories of how Delft became a cycling city, and how our family found living there for the first year in terms of transitioning from Vancouver to this really low-car environment that had these inclusive spaces. You can pre-order that from Island Press, but it won't be available for a few more months. Curbing Traffic, the Human Case for Fewer Cars in Our Lives. Lastly, I just want to plug our respective organizations. So if your city needs help on this front, if your city would like to call in the Dutch, if you will, give the Dutch Cycling Embassy a call, give Mobycon a call. We are willing and able to help you out and start implementing some of these principles and ideas and get you on your way to becoming more inclusive, more cycle-friendly, more equitable, more sustainable, and all of the above, all those great things. So thank you so much for your attention.
Yes,
and we will now hopefully be able to answer some of your questions.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, everyone. So I hope you enjoyed the tour, and I think now we're going to get our moderator, Bill, on hand to help us answer some of your questions.
Great. Well, thanks so much for the tour. That was amazing. Really, really appreciate you taking the time to do all of that, and the overhead shots and everything. It's, you know, a nice close second to being able to be there with you in person. So yeah, a lot of great questions. One of the things that came through a few times is I think it's all related to, you know, the as you said, the classifications of the different kinds of streets in the Crown Manual. I think that that's something that, you know, some of our folks would really like to hear more about. But one thing is the biodirectional paths. Are they on both sides of the street?
I'm gonna quickly, I'll let everyone know. So I'm hearing what Bill is saying, but Chris unfortunately is not, because we only have one of these earpieces. So I'm gonna repeat the question to Chris. Question around bidirectional, if it's on both sides of the street or just on one side. And I'll start off and just say that in most cases, the bidirectional would be on both sides of the street, at least here in Delft, that's our experience. There are some cases in some cities where it'll just be on one side, but for example, on Papsauseland, the street that we couldn't pronounce for that very reason, they're on both sides because there's shopping on both sides of the street that need to have access, and the crossings for bikes are not, you know, they can't be every 500 meters. So that allows that access, if you want to add.
It's context specific. I mean, we say this in the tour, and we stress this is the Dutch approach is looking at the uses on that street, the width of the street, the volumes of traffic on that street, and making a decision, coming up with a solution that works for that specific street. So in some cases, it's one-way cycle tracks on both sides. In other cases, it's bidirectional on both sides. Sometimes it's bidirectional on one or the other side, whatever makes the most sense for that specific street. And yeah, as we say, we understand there is a question of their efficacy, of their safety, but in general, we found them here, as long as you get the side street right and the intersections right, that generally they're just as comfortable and just as safe statistically.
Yeah, that safety is a question, right? I think people ask and have asked in this chat, well, no one's wearing helmets. What's going on here? What, how many crashes are there lots of crashes? How, what are the compared to other cities, how is it possible that you have this many people riding and no one's wearing helmets?
I'm going to pass this on to Chris because it's his favorite question. It's a question about helmets. And questions around what is, why does no one wear them here? What are the crash rates? Why has it? Why is no one seeing them?
Yeah, I mean, it is one of those paradoxes that I think coming from North America, it makes you really wonder whether we've gotten the idea of bike safety correct. 0.5% of the cyclists here in the Netherlands don helmets, and yet paradoxically, it's the safest place in the world to ride a bicycle. And it comes back to this idea of designing forgiving infrastructure, creating safety through reducing the speed and volume of cars, creating separation between bicycles and cars, and creating this culture of normalcy where everybody feels they can go out and ride a bike. And the safety in numbers, the upright bikes that they ride, kind of all combine to create this, this culture where a helmet is seen perhaps as strange as if you wore a helmet while walking or driving or ice skating or rollerblading or any other number of activities that we do throughout a day that runs the risk of head injury. It's not to say that head injuries aren't common here, but in general, the acceptance is that people are better off outside on a bike, getting cardiovascular exercise than sending them this message that they should wear a helmet or not cycle at all. And unfortunately, us coming from Vancouver, where helmets were mandatory for children and adults, we've seen the impact of that in that it sends a message that cycling is dangerous, fewer people do it, it throttles the success of the bike share system, and turns cycling into a niche activity that is only for the sports, the enthusiasts and the lifestyle cyclists, rather than the grandmas, the children, the wide variety and diversity of people you see cycling here.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add. That's a perfect answer.
Yeah, thanks for that. It's in the US, and I think in Canada as well, we have we do a lot of work helping people learn how to, bike with traffic, have to, be in the street, take the lane, because, we have a lot of disconnected bicycling networks, let's say. And so, I know that there's that safety education in the Netherlands as well. But with that sort of safety issue in mind, I guess, a couple of people noted, and you said something about it, Melissa, about the mopeds in the cycle tracks. It seems like, so they are allowed in the cycle track? Is that right? Mopeds?
So the question's about mopeds. It depends. So it's not every pathway. So there are areas where it is only for regular bicycles, whether that's self-propelled bicycles or your standard bike or a pedal assist. But there are places where mopeds are allowed to mix. Again, those are going to be predominantly very wide spaces to, again, allow for forgiveness, people to navigate around each other. But these mopeds, it might not seem it in the video, but they're all speed limited, so they can only go a maximum of
28 or something.
28 or 30 kilometers an hour, which is like 20 miles, 15, 20
15,
miles per hour.
18, yeah, somewhere in there.
Yeah. And then anything faster than that has to have a plate on it. Then they have to use the road space.
Wear a helmet.
They have to wear a helmet. Yeah.
Insurance and all these.
So
exactly.
You see somebody riding, really quickly, or like a vehicle that you think goes 20 miles an hour, 18 miles an hour, a moped. But then you think about in the US context, sometimes when bike facilities are put in, like cycle tracks and other things, you often hear that, hey, well, I don't want to be held up in there, right? You said some pedestrians can use these spaces. Like, can your more sports cyclists or people that want to go faster, can they go out and take the lane and go out on the motorway or the flowways, flow streets? Trying to get your names right. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's okay. The question is, people that want to go faster, can they use the roadways? Yes.
Most definitely. And we're speaking to you on a Sunday where we just spent the afternoon sitting out on our front porch watching the cycling street that we happen to live on, and it's this delightful mix of sports cyclists in Lycra, small children, the elderly. The Dutch are a cycling nation, and they also do it for sport. They do it quite well in the Olympics, and they use the infrastructure, they use the cycling streets to also exercise and for recreation. I think about a third of all of the kilometers cycled in the Netherlands are for sport and recreation, but it comes down to the width of the infrastructure and allowing for that slight variance in speed between the transport cyclists and the sports cyclist.
Yeah, I think the width is a really big key there. So more often than not, on a lot of these bike streets or just cycle tracks in general, the ones where you'll see people moving faster, they've been given that width to be able to navigate around. So yeah, I had mentioned, as you said, Bill, people like the woman with the pushchair, not pushchair is the wrong word.
The walker.
The walker, thank you. Oh my God. In the cycle track, but that space was wide enough that we didn't have to worry about making her feel uncomfortable. We could still pass her comfortably, and yeah, not impede on each other.
And you see people in wheelchairs and motorized wheelchairs. That space is really there for almost everybody to use, right up to, yes, your electric bike users, your cargo bikes that are delivering freight, and of course your carbon fiber racing cyclist that's out for a Saturday or Sunday ride, and it only works because that space is allocated, and it's not this kind of little 3-foot wide bike lane that all people are having to ride single file and compete with each other for the scraps on the side of the road.
Yeah. Does that help?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm trying to string these questions together. We're getting a lot of really great things here. So the other, I think it's important maybe for folks to know how the planning process works and the funding process works. So, is it all, there's you bring up the manual, the crowd manual. I think maybe, you're familiar with what we have in the United States with FHWA and NACTO and other things. Help us understand how planning and implementation works, and how we might also, I don't know if you have any tips on how to get more of this brought to our cities.
Right. So the question's around planning, funding, and bringing these ideas to North America, or how the process works here. What's important to keep in mind from our experience of understanding how streets and communities are planned here is it is very much planned not on a street-by-street basis, but on an overall network basis. The colleagues that I have will go to a given community, they'll look at the context of how the streets are being used, the speeds at which cars or anyone is currently using the space, how city officials want them to use the space, how fast they want people to move. And then they will help to determine what kind of treatments make sense. So whether it becomes just a neighborhood access street with traffic calming, whether it is going to become a more distributor road, so where we start to build in cycle tracks, or if we're going to have a mixed space environment, if for example it's a retail street, how are we going to mix, and at what speeds will it make sense, and what design elements do we need to put in place to make sure that if we do have, for example, bikes mixing with cars in a space, that we are not, the way it's designed doesn't allow or make cars feel like they should be traveling really fast. Again, it's not designing for the speed that you want. But looking at it, again, from that entire network perspective, so the streets feeding into distributors, where those streets are traveling to, what are the activities happening in on those various streets. So really looking at it as a complete picture as opposed to just one street environment. Chris, do you have ideas in terms of funding?
I mean, it's almost all done at the municipal level. Very little is actually separated walking and cycling funds. They're at a point now where Dutch cities it's just a general road and transportation fund, and walking and cycling is built into that. I realize that's not necessarily the point where a lot of US cities are at, so it may not be directly translatable, but yeah, I mean, our respective organizations certainly worked with a number of US cities and helped them put these network plans together, including the requisite funding. And in some instances, like in Austin, they've had to create a ballot measure, Austin, Texas, which brought the Dutch Cycling Embassy in to plan a network, had to go to a ballot measure to secure the funding for that, and now having secured the funding, are in the process of building out that network. So it's kind of two separate pieces that you need to rectify. And we realize right now, especially post-pandemic, that budgets are tight. But I think there's a lot of data coming out that spending a little bit of money on cycling now will save your city a lot of money down the line. And these social cost benefit analysis are kind of the next wave of helping this case for investment in active travel.
Yeah, and I think just one other thought in terms of how to take something like the Crow Manual and bring it to the US and apply it to US streets. And it's something Chris and I will always say is, it's right in the title, it's the Crow Manual, it's not necessarily the guide, this is how it has to be done. And so it's just the same as it is in the Netherlands. These are ideas that can be applied in the context of the way the street is being used or wants to be used. So it's not that you see a shopping street here and it has bidirectional cycle tracks on both sides. We need to copy and paste that and put that on whatever, on Main Street, for example, in any US city. It's how do we want this space to be? What ideas can we pull from this and adapt in context to the street that we're trying to put it on? And I think, for people that do roll their eyes when it comes to Dutch applications of design, that's something to really reinforce when you're having these conversations. Is you're not telling them we need to pave everything red and make it look like the Netherlands. We need to see the potential, see these ideas, and then figure out how we can use them here in the context of our. Every U.S. city is going to be unique, just like every Dutch city is going to be unique. So, figuring out how to apply those to what makes sense for you.
So was there a we've been in a global bike boom, right? For 2020, one of the bright points in a really, really bad year. Did you see a bump in ridership in the Netherlands?
Bike boom 2020. Have we seen a boom here?
Yeah, definitely. And it's actually accelerated the shift to electric bikes here. So people are maybe not necessarily cycling more often, but they're cycling longer distances. So maybe a trip that they would have taken tram, bus, or train of 7 to 10 kilometers, suddenly they're making it by electric bike instead. And so the sales of electric bikes continue to skyrocket. They now outsell regular bikes here in the Netherlands. And I think they've just accelerated this transition towards electromobility. But there's no doubt that the Netherlands was one of the few countries that didn't build any infrastructure, any pop-up bike lanes when the pandemic first hit, because the networks were already in place. And so they were able to absorb that lost capacity on the public transport system quite easily by helping people dust off their bikes or invest in an electric bike to cycle a little bit further and replace those lost public transportation trips.
Yeah, and I think that the e-bikes have also become part of the helping with mental health here too. We see out on the weekends the countryside cycle tracks are usually, the routes are usually filled with other people out cycling as a way to just get out, and because we're all working from home as well, so this is a way for us to stay connected to nature and stay a little bit sane while we still work through this.
No, that's a great point. Yeah, I think recreational cycling and especially weekend cycling has probably boomed the most as people try to get outside and get some fresh air and move their bodies, and we ourselves have certainly done that and more frequently as a result of being locked down Monday to Friday at the dining room office.
Yeah.
Is this part of e-bikes? I'm just interested, like the e-bikes and what's next for Delft. So one person writes that that had been there in the 80s and had seen the amazing work that was done even back then. But the plan now is to maintain 40% mode share for bikes in Delft, and you're at 43, and or even now it's up to 50. He says, how can it go even bigger in Delft? How do you keep that going? What's part of the plan?
Yeah, so the question is about what's next for Delft. Someone had actually been here in the 80s and knows the targets, 40% mode share by bike, but now we're up to 50. I think paradoxically, I know this is a cycling conference, but I think at least for us, what we notice is the big thing next for Delft is that they're actually moving towards a car-free, almost car-free city center. So the historic city streets that the person commenting would have experienced, there's been a gradual car diet happening in the last 10 years or so as they've moved more and more streets from having access for cars to removing that access altogether and building out with the reconstruction with the station, building parking outside of the city center for those people. And right now only actually residents or people with a permit can access the city, or deliveries, things like that. But that's sort of where it's going from here, which will create basically a city center that is accessible still all for bikes, but the idea is to create a much more pedestrian friendly or non-bicycle friendly
It's
space.
still accessible by car, but they have multi-story parking lots or underground parking lots on the perimeter of the city that they encourage people to use if you have to drive into the city. And otherwise, it's only residents, freight deliveries, and service vehicles for like plumbing and electricians that are allowed to enter the city center right now. And that's being kind of gradually transitioned to remove a lot of that traffic away, a lot of that parking out of the city. And they're even trying to replace a lot of the freight deliveries. Garbage pickup by cargo bike right now they're piloting, which is quite exciting. Trying to do as much as they can. And the plan right now is by 2025 to be completely emissions free in the city center. So only electric vans and cars will be allowed. And the hope is, that the car will have a decreasing role in the city center, because it is the living room of the city, and it's where people come to socialize and spend money and sit on the terraces, and the car doesn't add to that ambience or that atmosphere. So it's kept at the perimeter of the city center, and it's quite an achievement, I think. In a very short period of time, this low car plan only started to be implemented 15 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think the other thing beyond the city center too that's interesting is that there is investment being placed into the intercity connecting routes as well. So making it an option, I mean, very integral right now, but making it more of an option to be able to travel by bike, e-bike likely, to get from Delft to Den Haag or get to Rotterdam, depending on where employment centers are, where you need to get to. And so that's also where the investments is going, is how do we not only make Delft more sustainable and resilient and just a nicer place to spend time, but also how do we encourage more sustainable travel between the cities in the Randstad.
Because not only are the motorways packed, the trains are packed too. And so, there's this cost-benefit analysis that every train or car trip you can switch to bicycle ends up saving the city a fair amount of money. So it's, as you say, it's the next wave of upgrading that existing rural infrastructure into something that's a bit more comfortable and direct and can be used by people on e-bikes in particular.
Mm-hmm.
So we're getting close to time, which is sad. We know that we have a lot of questions, and we'll, maybe we can work with you to do something later on this year. We talked a little bit about that, possibly about, doing a follow-up. Any final words of inspiration? We're at a historic moment right now in the United States. And any sort of words of inspiration as we lead into the National Bike Summit and make the most out of recovering through bicycling in the United States?
Yeah, I think we both can offer respective words of inspiration to carry you through. But I think, we find ourselves, despite the very negative, obviously, impact that COVID has had on us as individuals, I think our cities, especially outside of the Netherlands, are seeing this opportunity from the tragedy to rethink how we design spaces. And I think there are so many cities in America that are exploring this. Some are a little bit further ahead and really taking advantage of that. But don't stop. I think this is going to be a journey in terms of how we move forward. Where we don't know how long this is going to take. So while we're waiting to return to some sense of whatever normal will be, take these opportunities to build these safer spaces and show people what is possible. And I think Chris and I always say, show, don't tell, and this is such an opportunity to be able to do that. Lobby your local officials or do some tactical urbanism, test out some pilots, and really take advantage while we can to change people.
Because this is exactly what happened in the Netherlands in the mid-1970s. They had a 6-week OPEC oil crisis. The streets were stripped of cars. The price of gas skyrocketed. Sale of bicycles doubled. And people went out and reclaimed their streets, and they painted bike lanes, and they realized that all this space had been given to the car, and started lobbying their politicians, finding consensus in their communities, and aligning with different organizations that all wanted a more livable city. That's, the students, the anarchists, the environmentalists, and the public health, the historical preservationists, all these different groups that all share the same goal. And I think that's one message we try to leave with our audiences is find your allies, and amplify your voices, and tell your politicians the status quo isn't good enough. And if they don't listen, then run for office yourself.
Melissa and Chris, thank you so much for this. And I know everyone, thank you for participating. I know you got to go to your next sessions. We have special sessions starting right now for LCIs, youth session for club leaders, and also for our advocacy organizations. So I just want to thank both of you once again for taking the time to do this. And we look forward to the next time, hopefully in person.
Yeah, of course. It's our absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having us.
Bye, everyone.